we said we want to measure cross-border corruption, so not in each country, but what goes over the border. I'm definitely interested in money, in flows or frequency, in something quantitative, but clearly we also will have qualitative things. We want to find synergies between money laundering and corruption. Money laundering has a very big legitimacy problem because it costs a fortune to do the anti-money laundering policy. ING has to hire 6,000 employees for compliance. They had to pay 1 billion for fine because they overlooked the terrorism finance. So money laundering would have to show that there is an effect, a positive effect. And this is what this whole thing since 20 years cannot do. We have not a single proof that anti-money laundering policy has reduced laundering. And I think with corruption, it's very similar. Can you really prove that anti-corruption policy helps? You have it in little details where you can show some effects. And we will also see that Felix can show that some treaties make a difference in money laundering, but we do not really have a quantitative studies, and I am interested in the quantitative part. That's why I also would like to have the case studies somehow integrated in our measurements, but that's a special tick of me. Just what is a gravity model, because we will have now 3 presentations for the basics, for those who are not do not like mathematics. It means it goes back to Newton's idea that gravitational force depends on the masses of 2 bodies, and we define the masses as gross domestic product of one country, gross domestic product of the other country, or crime proceeds of one country, crime proceeds of the other. And the question is, how does it get from country 1 to 2? It depends on the distance between the 2 countries and on all kinds what we call gravity, what pulls and what pushes away these money laundering streams or corruption flows. And we will show now 3 models which are very different. Lucio Picci is the only one who really measured corruption flows by using cases on the left side. We measure money laundering flows by using money laundering proxies on the left side. And Felix Alshut is the only one who measures money laundering by having it on the right-hand side of this model. So we have 3 gravity models which we will present. We got, for this one paper, which I want to present, we got a unique data set. In the Netherlands, banks and everybody has to report unusual transactions to the Financial Intelligence Unit. And this one then classifies what is suspicious and not. So they have data for every country sending money from to the Netherlands, which is classified suspicious. So what the Moroccans sent, what the Italians sent, and what the Dutch sent to Morocco and to Italy. So the Netherlands is in the center, and we have the amounts and the frequency of these reports. So we know how often does the Moroccan send suspicious money to the Netherlands and how much is it worth. So we got these data, which are very secret and which you have to do in a closed lab, otherwise you cannot work there. And for the first time, this allowed us to see which characteristics attract this Moroccan money to send to Netherlands and what attracts the Dutch money to be sent to Morocco, Italy, or somewhere else. And we simulated that these money flows go 5 times across the world. Usually a gravity model stops once. You send the money and then it's over. We did simulate it 5 times. The money goes here and then again there, and 5 times it stops. And it allowed us to measure domestic money laundering. So what comes from domestic crime and does not leave the country, how much crosses the border, and how much is sent from abroad to a country in this park there. So this is what we did in this study. If you want the cooking recipe for all our money laundering things, you first have to identify the crimes which you want to measure, which produce money laundering, the predicate crimes. For us, it's usually drugs and fraud, where we have the data. You look how much money is made with these crimes, and then you note which percentage needs laundering. Because if you're a drug dealer, you don't have to launder all your drug money. Partly you reinvest, partly you spend for eating and your girlfriends. So it's only the one that you need to put into the financial system. And then you must find out how this money is allocated across the world. This is the cross-border part. A gravity model has on the left side, our gravity model has the money laundering flows. And on the right side, it has, so to speak, other things. Namely, one is the characteristics of the sending country, which is gross domestic product usually in the population. If it's a rich country, if it's a potent, large country, we assume that there's more money sent than if it's a small country. The characteristics of the destination country, again, gross domestic product, population. And then a lot of shared characteristics. What attracts these countries to each other? And that can be the distance of the two countries, but also cultural distance. Do they know each other? Do they share the same region? Do they trade with each other? What attracts these countries to each other? So we have the money laundering flows between country I and J, Italy and Morocco, on the left side of our model. And we managed, since we had now the left side for the first time, data for the left side, proxies for money laundering amounts, we could basically look what are the significant characteristics that countries share so that they send money to each other. And we found that it's the physical distance. So if you're far away, you send less. So it's only push of the button to send money than if you're close. Borders are important. Speaking the same language, having the same religion, having colonial background together, Suriname and the Netherlands, and trading a lot with each other. These are the characteristics which make money flows going to each other. And the characteristics of the sending country was the most important, and also in Lucius' thing as is gross domestic product. So if it's a large country, you send more. The problem with us was that corruption control is also one of our explanatory variables, but it is not really significant. It's only one out of 4 ways it's significant. But the idea is if there's more corruption control in the sending country, you will try to send more money out. And if there's corruption control in the receiving countries, there will be less money sent. So the science makes sense, but it's still not significant. So these are the data which, if I really want to have to look, just 3 major findings. We found that the biggest launderer is the US and the UK, which we expected. And about 40% of money laundering in the OECD comes from these 2 countries. So EU has now less money laundering since UK left. We have also major findings that money laundering is in principle about 3% of gross domestic product. That's not new. That's basically between 2.5% and 3% almost all. So triangulation would mean that seems to be a quite reliable result. In percent of GDP, so relative to the size of the country, it's Belgium, Luxembourg, and Israel which have the highest laundering. When we did the study only for the EU, it's the Baltic states, which are the mostly threatened by money laundering, mainly from the Russian influence, because they're small and they have a lot of laundering. And we had measured for the first time the through flow. We could measure what it comes from one country to the other. And to our surprise, for example, the Dutch, which we always saw as the through flow country, is just in the middle, because in the Netherlands, the domestic money laundering from ecstasy production zone is even larger. So that was a surprise to ourselves. But you see the dark blues, so it's the West, basically, which has more through flows than the East. Well, and now what Marcel yesterday mentioned, some heroic assumptions in these models, which we always have to do. The first one, the suspicious transaction reports can be biased. If the Dutch FIE thinks Moroccan are more suspicious than Norwegians, they will classify many more Moroccan transactions as suspect, or maybe all, than the others. The second one is we must assume that the same drivers that makes the Turk sending money to the Netherlands is the same characteristics that makes the Israeli send the money to Turkey, that he will also look at GDP, speaking the same language, having trade together, and so on. If this does not hold, then the model would be wrong. That's why we think the closer the country are cultural to each other, OECD countries, rich countries, the more the model will hold. And Africa might have a completely different consideration why he sends money than the rich capitalist countries. But then we have still a lot of these tiny assumptions, 2% transaction cost, domestically money and money that flows in when it's sent further have the same destination. These are things which you could modify. And clearly the problem of the gravity model, it needs a lot of data. It needs the data for all the countries of the world. So every variable that we need for all 197, 200 countries of the world. And that's the problem, because some data are not there and others are very lousy, depending on which countries they are. Crime statistics are still very poor in international comparison. The UNODC made a lot of efforts for drugs, but still the intensity of heroin or whatever in the drug is still might differ. And then the Achilles heel is fraud data. Fraud to be measured and to compare can be enormous amount differences and also to speak very sensitive. And then our biggest, no, not biggest problem, but oldest problem, how much of each crime money needs laundering still dates back to Walker, John Walker, who did this first gravity model for Australia in 1996 or 95. And he just had experts estimating, you know, just erroneously, how much do you think people launder? And everybody just popped out a number. And this is the number we still use. It's, for example, 70% of drugs money will be laundered. Yeah? But do we know whether this is right? And clearly now for us, the problem is in how far do these proceeds of drugs and fraud money include corruption money? Or does this have a different drive? Or is only part of it corruption money? To separate this for corruption will be a big problem.